Has your doctor botched your surgery?
And can you sue him for it?
If your doctor made a mistake during surgery because of their negligence, that's malpractice.
And if they don't watch you carefully enough after the surgery, that could be negligence too.
Doctors always have to follow the standard of care.
What's the worst botched surgery that you've ever seen?
While we hope that none of us bought a surgery, medical legal concerns are issues that affect most surgeons at some point in their careers. Previously on the podcast, we were joined by Dr. Richard Mimeault and Liise Honey from the Canadian Medical Protective Association, or CMPA, who spoke to us about the landscape of medical legal issues for surgeons, as well as the anatomy of a lawsuit. In this episode, we explored the CMPA's innovative approach to try to prevent errors from happening in the first place. And they do this through their workshop called Theatre Arts. We are rejoined by Dr. Richard Mimeault, as well as Elisabeth Normand, to talk to us about Theatre Arts, a workshop developed by the CMPA to help OR teams improve the quality of their care and, most importantly, improve the culture and dynamics of the team in the operating room. In this episode, we talk about the Theatre Arts workshop and how improving culture may have profound impacts on patient safety and satisfaction. Check out all the show notes to see all the resources the CMPA has to offer, as well as links to our previous episodes. We'd love to hear your comments. Have you been part of a workshop similar to this? Have you been part of the Theatre Arts workshop? Send us an email at podcast.cjs@gmail.com.
Welcome to the Cold Steel Surgical Podcast with your hosts Amir Farouk and Chad Ball.
Thank you to Richard Mimeault and Elisabeth Normand for joining us today on another continuation of the CMPA collaboration with the Cold Steel Podcast. We're really excited to talk about a really innovative workshop that the CMPA has been putting on called Theatre Arts. And I think this workshop goes to the core of some of the non-technical skills that surgeons need to develop through the course of their careers. But maybe I'll just start by asking you both to introduce yourself, starting with Elisabeth. Elisabeth, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of, what your career has looked like?
Hi, thank you for having us. So my name is Elisabeth Normand. I'm one of the facilitators that work for the CMPA in the education department. My background, I'm a registered nurse. I also have a master's in business admin, and I'm a professional coach. And I've been at the CMPA for over 9 years now. And I used to manage an OR before I joined, which I have a high interest in that theater arts program.
Fantastic. And Richard, can you reintroduce yourselves again for our audience?
Sure. Thanks a lot. My name is Richard Mimeault. I am currently one of the physician advisors at the CMPA, working with Elisabeth. Like Elisabeth, I've been there for 9 years now, hard to believe. Prior to that, I was a general surgeon in Ottawa at the Ottawa Hospital, mostly hepatobiliary surgery. Since I joined the CMPA, working on ways to support physicians in the delivery of safe and reliable care, and our topic today is really one that both Elisabeth and I feel really does fulfill that objective of supporting you.
Yeah, so the last episode, and if folks haven't listened to that episode, we'll put the link in the show notes to the previous episode that we've done. The last episode, we spent a fair amount of time talking about medical legal risks, some of the sort of procedural things about what to do if you get into trouble or if you're having to deal with that type of thing. But I think I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit today about some of the important ways that we can actually keep ourselves out of trouble, because I think that's far better than obviously having to deal with trouble once you've already gotten into it. And so the CMPA, as mentioned, offers a workshop called Theatre Arts. And maybe, Elisabeth, you could talk to us a little bit about what that workshop is and sort of give us an overview of what that workshop offers.
Yes, so our theater arts program is a 2-day, quite intensive, actually, a very busy 2 days that it is offered to surgeons and their teams. And when we're saying teams, it's multidisciplinary teams. So we have anesthesiologists, nurses, managers, anyone who might have a line of sight on a specific issue that they're looking to improve. Now we work with multiple teams from one organization to really have the biggest impact. And we drive these teams through a design thinking approach to really help uncover the fundamental issues that people are struggling with on a day-to-day basis. And then we build it back up and try to find new ways to innovate into solving these issues that that the frontline staff feel that they want to improve patient safety. But there's also a big component of team dynamics and communication that is embedded in there.
I'm curious, what led to the creation of this course? Clearly, the effort has been impressive based on what we've heard, and the course really delivers. But what was the initial genesis of it, Richard?
Well, the initial genesis was twofold, actually. So one was, how do we move from basically telling people what the right thing to do is to actually supporting them, within the context of this complex adaptive system called healthcare that we work in. I think we talked about it in our last podcast. When we look at how surgeons get into trouble, medical legal trouble, the biggest contributing factors aren't about technical knowledge or skills. It's actually really about things like communication, teamwork, leadership, situational awareness, not, how many gallbladders you've done or how many hernias you've done. That does not seem to be the issue. And that's where that sort of theater arts, which sounds like a little bit of an artsy title, but that's the whole point of it. So maybe some of the folks listening to it would have seen our Know Your Risk for General Surgery that we published earlier this year, and which again just reinforces that, it's a very small percentage of time when peer experts look at a case and go, oh, the problem here was the surgeon didn't have enough knowledge or was technically inept. That's a very rare contributing factor. So we were looking, okay, what can we do to actually support the improvement of team dynamics? And one of the approaches is to look at frontline problems. So, looking at a surgeon and the folks that are working with the surgeon and say, okay, we have this problem in our environment or this opportunity to improve in our environment. Can we use that as a way basically to explore the application of this concept of understanding that we work in complex adaptive systems, that none of us can possibly have a full line of sight on a problem in healthcare. They're too complex. And what are those teamwork, collaboration, perspective sharing, diminishing hierarchy, creating psychological safety? Can we develop a workshop that would allow us to promote those things? And so that's what Theater Arts has done, really. We're using this opportunity for improvement as a way to promote those skills, basically. So, often we've had the comment, oh, so this is a QI workshop. Sure, we do talk about QI and root causes and fishbones and all that stuff, but that is an excuse for getting into the discussion about all of these other non-technical skills. How do we work together? How do we create those relationships? Because that's fundamentally where we get into trouble, particularly in the OR, because we know that, I think we talked about that in the last podcast too, for surgeons, the OR is actually the place, the phase of care that is most frequently associated with medical legal events. No surprise.
So how do you select the participants for the Theater Arts program? Is it people come and they sign up for it, Elisabeth, or are you actually selecting the whole team? And is it typically teams or individuals? I'm curious about the participant sort of profile that come to these workshops.
That's a very good question. We work with organizations. So the organizations reach out to us. They have sponsorship. which is a key factor actually to get good sponsorship and support from leadership in moving these initiatives forward. So we work with organizations. Mostly we will do a big chunk of the OR department, and it's going to be up to leadership to decide who is part of which team. And it also depends because we work across Canada. So there are some very large centers that we've worked with and some very small. So depending on the size of it, you select different types of groups. But as long as the teams are multidisciplinary, we really want every line of sight possible, every perspective possible to help solve these complex issues or these problems, I guess, in this complex environment, and really help shift some of these issues moving forward into a positive light to be able to solve them.
That's so interesting. I'm curious, Elisabeth, what are some of the common traits or characteristics that you've noticed about these programs that have come to you and asked for theater arts help? Is it interpersonal issues in their OR? Is it truly just a QI drive to get better? Are there mechanical issues? Are the groups that you walk into in any way resistant, or are they, or do they embrace it? Or what's sort of the culture and your initial assessment when you roll in there?
A little bit of everything. I'd have to say, often people reach out to address some cultural issues, like not cultural, like the culture in the UR, I guess, the dynamics, the team dynamics. There are some underlying issues that need to be resolved. We've also had people who reach out because there's been an unfortunate event that happened, like a never event maybe has occurred, and it's shaken the staff, and they're really looking at improving and making things better. We've also had, especially I want to say in the past couple of years, with the wait lists that are so long and the short resources, we're looking at gaining some efficiencies in the OR. And there's all these systems that are already in place that people are just not using. And that's what we've seen, and a little bit of why and how this was created is we've seen over the past decades huge advancements in technology and standardizing process. We've seen the lean, the ERAS, all these protocols, they're in place, the surgical safety checklist, like everything's already there. But it's about now the human factors, like how are people using these, supporting these, creating or using these tools in a better way to have a good communication. Like I'm thinking the surgical safety checklist, for example, it's been there for 15 years, 20 years, maybe. But we haven't seen that improvement on patient safety, even though it's implemented and it's mandatory everywhere. So now we're looking at the human factors. How is this tool being used as this last safety net and communication tool as a team to ensure that things are happening safely?
Yeah, and I think the surgical safety checklist to me is a perfect example. It is one that I kind of feel I've lived, right? When the surgical safety checklist was first introduced for us at the Ottawa Hospital was, here's this yellow sheet. Everybody needs to do this before the OR. And I thought, honestly, at that time, I was thinking, oh, great, another way to delay start times. How is this going to help us? I already know the patient's name. And it really didn't take very long before, starting to realize, heck no, this is actually pretty useful because, even simple stuff like I actually know the anesthetist's name, I know the nurse's name, I'm more likely to say something or ask for something because that barrier isn't there. It's that, again, those human factors, creating those relationships and shared mental models before the day starts. Because again, the data is super clear. That's where we run into problems.
Just to follow up on Chad's question there, without getting into too much specifics, can you tell us, Elisabeth, a little bit about some of the, like when you talked about cultural issues, can you make that a little more concrete for our audience? Like, what kind of cultural issues are we talking about here in the operating room? Is this like, someone yelling when they have a bad day or being grumpy, or like what are we talking about here?
Well, there's definitely hierarchy and privileges that are present in the OR. And Richard, feel free to comment if you want to. So this is something that we see in terms of that psychological safety. So if someone in the OR is seeing something happening, they might not want to speak up because either they have a lot of respect for the surgeon, for example, who might be about to do something that other people are seeing, but they're feeling that there's this hierarchy that prevents them from speaking up, or they're afraid of being wrong. And there's a trusting relationship that needs to happen for people to feel comfortable speaking up, even though they're thinking, oh, he knows way more than I do. Now, what if I'm wrong? And what if my intervention is perceived as being not valuable or disruptive? So there's a lack of trust that happens sometimes within the team dynamics, or a lack of communication also. And yeah, there is hierarchy present and privileges. And this is actually one of the key concepts that we address on day one. We have a plenary on complexity that really looks at the complex environment that we work in and how these behaviors or the lack of trust, psychological safety, the issues in team dynamics and communication contribute to issues that are happening in our environment.
And it's always interesting too, because teams don't always come and say, oh, our problem is we want to improve culture, or we have a toxic culture. But having all of those different perspectives, so having a nurse, an orderly, somebody from the supply department, when they start working on problems, it becomes very clear that there are these hierarchical structures. And while the surgeon, which is often the case that we see, goes, no, I mean, there's no culture issues. When other people start inputting, then it becomes clear that no, there are barriers to sharing ideas. No, we don't feel like we can do this. So the culture of necessity comes up once you start the work.
You guys are touching on some really important things, but one that's close to my heart, and I would ask both of you this question, is there must be some sort of relationship between the size of an institution or a hospital or a facility you go into and some of the trends in or challenges in creating great cultures. And, I think of here in Calgary at the Foothills Hospital, this building, we have 7 sets of ORs in 4 buildings. The number of people here, just the sheer, women power and manpower every day, just by definition, because of the size of it, it's a little bit like the Titanic. It's moving culture, creating culture, improving culture is really a challenge. And when some of us go to smaller hospitals around Calgary to help for a day or two here or there, it seems to be so much easier because, as you point out, everyone knows everyone, and the surgeons know the processors, and the processors know the nurses, and it's this beautiful but palpable difference in culture. So I guess my question really is, how do you begin to break down and create forward momentum in these sort of megalith facilities that tend to become more and more common over time in North America in particular?
Mm-hmm. It really depends. We have seen smaller centers who are struggling, but larger centers as well. In my mind, you're choosing every day to set the culture in your OR. Like, it doesn't matter how large it is, you're coming into your day. You can choose to ask people to introduce themselves, get to know them for a couple of minutes before the day gets started, and really set the tone as to how the day is going to go for that team. So there are very realistic ways to reset that culture every day. And at some point, people who come back in your room might expect the same thing. Hey, my name is Dr. So-and-so. What's your name? How long have you worked here? Are you comfortable with the procedures we're going to do today? Anything you anticipate we might need to understand before we get the day started? All right. And then you move on to your surgical safety checklist and everything that comes on. So it's a few minutes, but every individual has the power to make that change in a positive way every day, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't think, with the course that or the workshop that we have the illusion that we're going to sort of shift the culture of an entire organization. And in fact, one of the things that we're putting forth in the workshop is that, as individuals and as teams, we only have some leverage points in a huge system, but we do have leverage points, and that we can change the climate in our room, and that the climate in our room will have an effect on the climate in the room beside us. So if if Elisabeth is a nurse and my room is a horrible room to work in, and Chad, your room is fantastic, and eventually the head nurse comes to me and goes, nobody wants to work in your room anymore, Richard. I think that's how culture shifts. I mean, that's maybe a bit silly of an example, but it's a spread of the climate in rooms. So I think the reason we've shifted the way we deliver theater arts. We used to invite teams from many different places to come to Ottawa and do it here. Now what we do is we go to the actual institution, and our hope is that by having more teams from the same place, that maybe we'll achieve that threshold where it actually does kind of start pushing the culture forward.
That's all fantastic, and I love the questions that you guys are answering. These are fantastic. Maybe Elisabeth, you could talk to us a little bit about sort of the structure of the workshop itself. What do you mentioned that you have a plenary, but can you tell us a little bit about what actually happens during the workshop? What's the structure of it? Maybe you can actually even delve into some of the activities that you'll do with participants and their teams.
It's a very busy 2 days. And like Richard said, it's not a QI course, though we talk a little bit about QI, but we really use QI as an excuse to have difficult conversations and gain different perspectives on issues that are happening. So how it works is that each multidisciplinary team is coming in with an issue that they're looking to solve. For example, it could be, I'll use OR start time, for example. So they're coming in and their line of sight is looking at OR start time. And we'll drive them through this design thinking approach in gaining a strong understanding of, why ORs are starting late. And we spend quite a lot of time in understanding the problem and having these different perspectives being heard to ensure that we understand the problem fully. And then they're going to pick one part of it, a little piece of that puzzle on OR start times, for example. And they'll pick that one and start to build and design innovative new ways of solving this specific issue that they're looking to solve. And through this process, we make sure that every voice is being heard. So we always have individual activities first, and then there's a structured sharing activity to make sure that even the quiet ones and the quiet voices actually are being heard and are part of the conversation. Then we start testing and prototyping that plan as to, okay, we're looking at improving OR start time. We're thinking this might be a good idea. Then they're making a plan on how they're going to go about improving this space. And this is all meant to be frontline ownership. So we're looking at very realistic, small ways to address their problem that the team can carry forward when they go back to their work environment. And we have some activities around consulting. We start testing the prototype on day 2, where they'll ask their peers, they'll tell a little bit about their plan, and then they're going to receive some feedback and solve some of the issues that they're still struggling with. And at the end of day 2, they present their work to a panel of experts. There's always somebody from the CMPA, somebody from the hosting institution, the organization that we're working with, to showcase their work, their plan, what they've done. And that also gets buy-in from the colleagues who are there, the 40, 50 other people. They know this project is coming and they know why, they understand why, because they've received a small presentation on it and how they're going to move forward. I think one of the key pieces, everybody can do a 2-day workshop and have fun and have this great plan when they leave, but we actually want people to implement it. So there's a support program that is attached to the theater arts program. It's called our Commitment to Change program. And this is a coaching program that teams get back together for 3 coaching calls over 6 months to really help drive them through that momentum of implementation and getting some feedback. Sometimes they don't quite succeed the way they thought they would, and readjust and go along the way. And I want to say like 90% of the teams who've completed this have actually done their improvement project and more, and they've been successful at it.
Yeah, and I might, one of the things I think you've alluded to, Elisabeth, is, one thing that we insist on is that teams come with their problem, their, something that they see. This is like frontline ownership. I want to fix this. And what's fascinating is we spend, I'm going to say that almost half a day on just understanding the problem. And it's really interesting to see with all the people at the table, if this is facilitated properly, how the problem they came in with actually changes. You get a much more dynamic root cause analysis done, and they're able to identify all the different issues, as opposed to sort of one person at the table kind of leading the thing and saying, this is our problem, and I think this is what we should do. Surgeons are famous for that, by the way. And I put my hand up because I've been there. So I think that's a hugely important part, is that we give a lot of time to just work on the problem. And we use things, liberating structures, actually facilitative methods that make sure all voices have not just an opportunity, but are not quite coerced, but we create conditions that you feel like you need to put an input, and you can do it individually as opposed to succumbing to groupthink.
Sorry to ask maybe a tougher question here, but it all sounds really great, and I know the deliverables have been great by report, but I'm curious, both anecdotally and maybe objectively, how do both of you know that the content you've delivered and the interactions you've provided are gaining traction? Outside of maybe the follow-up piece that you talked about, Elisabeth, do you have metrics? Do you have feedback? What are sort of the indicators that this is a great program, which it clearly is?
So I think, well, I'm going to say we follow folks for 6 months. That's flexible. Some teams have asked for help for longer, which I see as a measure of real engagement, to say, hey, we'd like to go for a little longer. We've had teams that have asked us to come back and, help them move stuff forward again. We've had some places ask us to come back and do it again because they saw the benefit, but they still need that push. So I think the evidence is there. If your question is, can we look now and say that, we've had an impact on safety and reliability of care? I think that's a tough one to measure, and that's, maybe on a very long term, just because there's so many things that contribute to safety and reliability. But I think the surrogates that we're accumulating by virtue of staying associated with these groups suggests that that people are actually using the skills and implementing the behaviors and attitudes that the workshop was trying to convey. I don't know, Elisabeth, something to add?
Yeah, we've had teams who actually we're still following up with, a year, some 2 years after, are still sending us some emails because they're quite happy with their progress and what they've made. If you're thinking of the culture aspect that we're trying to shift, that's very hard to measure. And we're keeping in touch with them for about 6 months as a standard, because at some point we have to shift our resources to another organization who also needs help. We do have limited resources. It would be nice to follow up with them for years, but we have some teams who've kept in touch. And once in a while I get an email and they're like, hey, our NSQIP data came back and it looks awesome. We're still doing it. It has shifted the way that we do things, and it is now kind of set in stone. And they're even expanding through provinces in some cases, the new way of doing things and how they're going about it.
So you mentioned infection rates, Elisabeth, but maybe you can give us some concrete examples. And I particularly want to pick up on what Richard said as well about this idea that people came in with a certain idea of what the problem was and left with a very different conception of what the actual problem was. And I'm sure that also affected what the solutions that they came up with. So again, not to get super specific, because I'm sure, we want to protect the privacy of the teams that have come, but maybe you can give us an example, Elisabeth, of a problem that a team came in with, how that problem shifted in their mind over the course of the workshop, and maybe some of the solutions and innovations that they came up with, just to give our listeners an idea of what they might expect to experience as part of the workshop.
Sure. I'm just thinking what example I could give you. There's a couple of times where there are teams that came in that had an unfortunate, like a never event that happened, and coming in, they had this clear path as I'm going to add this safety measure and that safety measure, and we're gonna get this done, and that's gonna improve our safety, and no never event will ever happen. And by going through this process and gaining a better understanding of the space and what they're working with and how the patient does make it to the OR and all of these safety areas that could be improved along the way, their focus shifted and they left with wanting to do like a last huddle before the surgery with everyone present, including the patient, and having that 3 minutes where everybody is focused and narrowed down, and kind of the surgical safety checklist used in a new way, but that's not what they came in with. And leaving with that, they spread it to the entire surgical department about, this is how we should do things moving forward. And they got buy-in from over 100 staff when they went back to their work environment. And within just a couple of months, they've actually noticed a few errors. Either somebody came in and with a very similar name, for example, and they caught it right away, and they were able to rectify these small mistakes from happening. So this is one example of, they came in with a specific idea in mind on how they were going to resolve the issue, and they left with something completely different. Other people are coming in. One was around cancel cases. Like the ORs were always running late, and there were many cancel cases at the end of the day because things were going by extension. And what they left with was actually, well, no, it's about taking care of the patient when things like that happen. So what their idea became is to have a committee as to when there's a cancel case. There will be the surgeon who goes, the nurse, and the manager, and they'll all go talk to the patient and the family and take care of their needs, because the patient took a day off, they made it to the OR, they paid for parking, they have family around. So instead of focusing on decreasing cancel cases, which does happen for different reasons, they focused on taking care of the patient when those things do happen. So there's a lot of back and forth that goes on, and they'll leave with something tangible that they can actually action on.
And sometimes it's not even just the outcome, right? I mean, I think the fact, again, going back to what the intention of the workshop is, I don't think it's even so much achieving that positive result as much as the work that goes into achieving that positive result. And sometimes they were very simple things, like the wound infection rate that you were referring to. The team wanted to improve the wound infection rate after bowel cases. And when they did their work on, well, how do we do this? One of the things that came out was, well, we don't have a consistent way of making sure that there's a closing tray. I mean, something very simple. But clearly there were some real obstacles to that happening. They achieved that, and then what they achieved was then applied to the rest of that health authority. So, seems like a very small thing, but all of a sudden you've made it quite a big impact. So we're really happy with the results like that. And for sure, there are some teams where, things don't happen. One of the things that we haven't touched upon is, the importance of leadership being on board in organizations. And we've learned that as we've gone through different iterations of theater arts, is that the onus is on us as well to make sure that there's leadership buy-in, that leadership has to be there, that leadership has to be encouraging folks to do this. And as Elisabeth mentioned, that leadership is actually part of that presentation at the end, that, you can't say we didn't talk about this. You were there and you gave me feedback.
I'm glad you brought that topic up, Richard, because that's where I wanted to go next, exactly that. And, Amir and I have talked a lot on this podcast, and we've certainly written a lot about the difference between leadership and management. And I won't go down that tangent, but, I also recognize, I guess, that these maybe are a little bit of a biased sample of folks that are doing the course because they reach out to you. So they're at some level energetic and keen to try and create that culture change and improve their locale. But you must run into resistant individuals or strata in a particular healthcare system at that leadership and or management level. And I'm curious how you try and get them engaged and involved and kind of reframe their participation. Because my observation over time, and correct me if I'm wrong in this setting, is that when you get it right and you can re-engage that particular cohort, boy, things start to move forward well. And if you can't, I think to your underlying point, things don't go forward very quickly at all.
Yeah, we've had the experience of, I'm going to say a naysayer heavy workshop, and that's really tough, actually. It is very tough, and I think it's very unclear in those situations whether we are making a difference. And maybe the approach isn't, or maybe Elisabeth will have a more nuanced approach, but I think the way we've approached that is, it's important to have naysayers in the workshop because they have a perspective, and that perspective can be quite useful. But you can't have all naysayers. You need, and you have to be able to, and that's where the facilitation comes in very importantly. You have to be able to make sure that if the naysayers have a very strong voice, if they have a lot of privilege, that you're creating an environment where everybody else now feels comfortable to start sharing with a naysayer. I think, and Elisabeth runs the program, so she may naysay me, but I think our approach now is, if we're not convinced that leadership is in this and that they have teams that really are looking forward to making changes, we might tell them, well, maybe this isn't the right time to do a workshop like this. I don't know, Elisabeth,
No, you're right. And we have other programs who might be more suited for different purposes. Like this one needs clear buy-in from leadership, clear support, because these teams are going to put in a lot of work afterwards to get their project moving and be passionate about it. And they need to be encouraged and they need to be celebrated because they are working really hard in improving something in their work environment. And slowly it trickles and it does shift the culture. Anyways, we hope it does. I think one of the key things around the leadership buy-in is something that we do ahead of time is set reasonable expectations and make sure that it's clear for everybody. So we meet with the sponsors that often have that oversight, but we also have a meeting with all of the leaders who are involved in making these projects move forward afterwards, and we meet them ahead of the workshop just to set expectations. What's the tone? What's to expect? How can you support all of your staff in moving through the workshop, but also do something with it afterwards? We want change. We don't just want like a fun 2-day workshop. We actually want real change, tangible change in their environment. And then how can they best support their teams moving forward? So the coaching program that we do with all of the teams, we also do with a leadership team. And then we report back on how the teams are doing, what their needs might be, who is struggling a little bit, who needs to be celebrated, and how they can remove barriers to help these teams be successful at making the change.
And we actually make sure they have a little more skin in the game, just beyond saying, yeah, we're in with you. The theater arts program, like all CMPA offerings, is free of charge. There's no, it doesn't cost members or any of the team members anything for us to go there and facilitate and deliver this over 2 days. But what we do ask the organization, and we say, as an organization, you have to hold this outside of the hospital. You have to free people's time up, and you have to feed them. So they do have some skin in the game, like actual dollars and cents. So with that, I think by and large we've been able to align leadership with the teams, but we're still working on it.
Just to pick up on what Chad's saying, what do you think, in all the years that you've done these workshops, and especially, circling back to this idea of culture and psychological safety and those types of things, what do you think are the characteristics of the teams that seem to do really well throughout these workshops and seem to make some positive change versus the teams, kind of like what Chad was alluding to there, that where there are the naysayers? And what do you think the key differences are in terms of their team dynamics and how they pick up on psychological safety? Like, what are there some tangible things that our listeners can take away from this conversation, even if they can't necessarily be part of the workshop, but maybe that they can actually implement within their own teams or start to work within their own cultures to make their workplaces better?
Well, I think the first thing is you actually have to want to change or improve. If you want nothing to do with it, then it's hard. It's hard to move forward and make any change. So that would be number one. I guess the second one where we've seen success is when people start having an appreciation for each other. And there's this mutual respect and trust that is starting to be established along the team. And that's something that we see over the 2 days. Like, we can actually see a shift happening within that space. But I think if there is if there's a lack of respect for other specialties, multidisciplinary team, each other, I think that leads to maybe something not as successful as we wish we would be. And most of the time, like, there's a couple of naysayers or some people that don't want to change. But at some point, when 90 or 80% of that team is starting to trust each other and respect each other and communicate better, then you feel like an outsider and you want to be part of that group. So I think that does help shift the culture over time.
Yeah, join the party. But I think to your question, Amir, I think when you're, what are the actual attitudes and behaviors? I mean, they're fundamentally very simple. It's about humility, curiosity, dropping judgment, the sort of fundamental communication skills, which, I mean, all of us can do individually without participating in a workshop. I think the difficulty, though, is the analogy I often use is, I may have every book about building muscle mass and exercise in my library here, and I may have read every single one of them, and I could be an expert and tell you exactly what you have to do. But unless I go to the gym and start pumping iron, it's pointless, right? Same thing here. I mean, we can talk a lot about communication and teamwork and leadership, and we can know a lot, but it's actually applying it. And I think that's what the workshop does. It's a 2-day opportunity to apply skills. It's a real life simulation of, how do I use these skills? And the QI is just an excuse to use them.
This might be a bit of an unfair question given the structure and the intermediate to longer term follow up, but I'm curious. Just based on human nature, we often apply interventions or a QI project or a peer-reviewed publication or just a small shift in culture to significant success in the short term. But in the longer term, that can fade. It has the tendency to, become at the bottom of the pile instead of the top as a recurring important item. I'm curious if either of you have noted some of these successful units or hospitals or groups that have really sustained that momentum of culture improvement, quality improvement, people improvement over time. I'm curious if there's any trends or any observations that you note about those groups that maybe separate from the bulk of us.
I'd have to say that it cannot be seen as a project. And it has to be so small that it's easily doable. And once it's been done for a few months, that you can't even think of going without it anymore. I think that's been the trick or the secret is we'd actually discourage teams from taking on huge projects. We've had some who still wanted to take on huge projects, and some of them are still doing it. But really, the ones that have been successful, it's something that's been done within a couple of months with very limited resources that's now established, like as simple as putting a poster on the wall as to how to hand over in a proper way so we don't miss anything, and that there's an order to doing the handover that does improve patient safety, it improves communication. But just putting a poster on the wall like that was their project. And it's still happening now because people gotten used to the new way of doing things. And now it's just part of the new culture. So that's what we aim for, is something very small, very achievable quickly, successfully, that then you can even, it's just part of the process.
I think realistically, your question is a tough one. I mean, can we measure that? Have we measured it? I don't think we have and will have the resources to measure something like that. And that's what I meant by, earlier when I was saying, our change in approach with trying to go to one place and try and get that threshold of bodies in it and involved, that it actually becomes a sustained thing. Because, I mean, I think we would all recognize that, particularly in today's environment, with just all these sort of resource changes, but always constrained, big turnovers in staff and leadership all the time. This is never a one and done, right? I mean, it's continuous work. Culture is it's an everyday thing. But I think if we can cross that threshold, then there's a chance that that's going to happen. But can we measure it? I don't think we have the resources or would be able to measure it. It would be, and I think it would be a tough measure.
So I want to thank you both again for spending the time with us over the hour. It's really been a really delightful conversation, exploring these really important concepts. And I really think our listeners should pay attention to what both of you are saying and consider doing the CMPA workshop or other workshops like it, because I think the culture that we need to build in our operating rooms, in our hospitals, in our workplaces is really what's going to define our success moving forward. I want to ask both of you, if there's two things that you want our listeners to walk away with after listening to this episode, what would those two things be? And maybe I'll start with you, Richard, and let Elisabeth have the last word.
Well, the first one would be just shameless advertising. If you have an interest in something like this, explore it with your leadership and let us know. These are things that we have to plan ahead of time because they're very resource intensive, and that your organization also has to plan ahead of time. But remember, it's essentially free of charge for the people participating, so it's actually a pretty good deal, I would say. And the second part is that really don't walk into this thinking this is a QI workshop. This is really about skills that are transferable to the ward, to home, to raising your kids. I mean, they're really just transferable human relationship skills that we're talking about. Elisabeth.
My turn. I've had a couple of seconds to think about that. I would say everybody on an individual level has the power to shift the culture in their environment. So that would be my one takeaway. And you don't necessarily need a big workshop to start shifting your own environment. But that comes to my second thought is if you do want to work with us, we're happy to do so. Don't hesitate to contact the CMPA for that or any other resources that we have. We have many courses, some that are longer. They're not necessarily a full 2-day workshop, but if you are interested in really making a shift in your environment, we're now expanding this program to other specialties beyond the OR as well, because we've seen such great success with our OR teams. So yeah, reach out and we'd be happy to collaborate with you.
You've been listening to Cold Steel, the official podcast of the Canadian Journal of Surgery. If you have comments or questions, please email us at podcast.cjs@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.